if you're wishing to understand more about the Chamber and the Connect evenings and what we do for the community, please hit me up. We've also got our promotional officer sitting right here, and also at the back there 2 other executive members in Nick and in Gary. Dean, over to you.
Good, thank you, Olivier. I just want to acknowledge too the traditional custodians of land where we're holding this meeting here this afternoon, and also acknowledge the elders, both past and present. And look, and thank you. And I think you're very privileged actually to have a local chamber actually do care about the business community and the wider community too. So thank you for holding this today and hosting us here this afternoon. So look, tonight we're going to have a presentation by Drew Twigg. Drew will be up in a minute. Drew is the area manager for Kosciuszko, which includes Jindabyne, and of course on the other side of Murray we've got he's helped here by, or aided I should say, by James Perosi. James actually lives here in Jindabyne and is the manager for water for Snowy Hydro. And we have Charlie Litchfield, who is the environmental manager for Snowy Hydro. Following that, we have Jeff Morgan here, who's the COO, or the Chief Operations Officer for Snowy Monaro Regional Council. So we actually, Olivier and I discussed about this. We felt that it was probably timely for Snowy to come out here in the springtime, and it probably should happen every year, to talk about how Snowy operates, and potentially what's going to happen into the future. So it makes it better for the community to know fully what's going on without a lot of hearsay. So you can hear it from the key people that are here tonight. So what I would like to see happen here tonight is, you wouldn't mind, I know you'll have some burning questions, but would you please let Drew and then Jeff speak and go through their presentations, and then I'll facilitate some Q&A from the floor after that. So rather than actually break it all up, I think it'd be better if you're okay with that. So with that, I'm going to ask Drew Twigg to come up and introduce himself, and Drew, start the presentations. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Good evening, everyone. So as Dean mentioned, my name is Drew Twigg. So I'm the operations manager for the, let's call it the Murray part of the catchment or the business. So that includes Kosciuszko, Jindabyne, right through to Cancover and into the released into the Murray side of the scheme. A bit of a business overview, if you can, James. So for those who don't know too much about Snowy, and there's people that know a lot and others that don't know too much, we're fortunate we've got sort of 16 power stations in the hydro part of our business. A number of major dams, of which one's right at our footsteps now. We've also got a retail part of our business with Red Energy, and outside of our hydro generation, we've also got some gas and diesel assets. So we have gas assets presently up near Newcastle, also down in Melbourne. We have 2 different ones there, and when we picked up Lumo Energy a few years ago, we got some diesel assets in South Australia. So that all feeds into the national electricity market, essentially. Yep, thanks, mate. So a bit of the history of the scheme. So obviously it was a water vision, but only came to a reality by working out how to pay for it, and that was through pulling the energy out of the water in order to provide that water through to the food bowl, to drought-proof the food bowl and grow for our nation. Thanks, mate. So releases, we're all pretty familiar with the releases here, particularly out of Jindabyne there that you see now. So you see it, we're in the pattern of La Nina at the moment. We're in a pretty unprecedented, and that word's been used way too much in the last few years, but in a bloody wet condition. And one of the challenges when it's really wet is that water backs up through the infrastructure and the water infrastructure through our states to a point where we just get that backed up, that we're going to hit points where we need to start making releases in all different areas when no one really wants it. Challenge with water, you've either got too much or not enough, but we try and balance that as best we can to make sure that we provide that 10-year of drought proofing to grow that food and energy. Might let you just touch on those releases, mate, if you can.
Yeah, yep. So I think, as Drew said, this year's been quite an interesting one. So I think most people here will know that Jindabyne got to full supply level earlier this year, just after Christmas, and stayed there for a while. Actually the wettest summer on our records, so we've got records that date back to 1905 and the wettest summer by quite a margin for this part of the catchment. Since then it's stayed very wet. We've had the pumps running we've had. The common misconception we want to try and bust that myth again tonight is that we can't get the water from Jindabyne back to Jindabyne. So looking up the hill at Jindabyne and some airspace still available there, we can't get the water physically from this catchment back to that catchment. The pumps to Jindabyne can only move water from here at Jindabyne across to Jindabyne. And from Jindabyne, the water goes down the hill through Murray 1, Murray 2 power stations and into the Murray River. So yeah, it's been wet. It's very much likely to stay wet at least towards Christmas and potentially in early 2023. Just jump to the next slide. Of course, mate. A few more points there. And so yeah, we've got pumps that can move water westward. The only other way to get water out of Lake Jindabyne is through the dam and down the Snow River. So releases that people will be familiar with over the last decade or so into the Snow River, they are a product of a program called the Snow River Increased Flow Program. So that was something that came about when Snow Hydro was corporatised in 2002. And essentially, New South Wales, Victorian, Commonwealth governments bought back water entitlements from people out west that water would have gone to from the original construction snow scheme. Bought that water back to be delivered to the Snow River for the environment. It's now the role of the New South Wales government to determine when that water gets released. So we have, and a lot of people may have seen our release schedule that we publish on the web. So we get given from the New South Wales government daily release targets that we have to meet every day of the year within some pretty tight tolerances. So operationally, you know, that's a function of our licence. It's a legal matter if we breach our licence intentionally. Snow Hydro's business is not allowed to release more than they have to release targets on a day-to-day basis. When we get to conditions like we are now, or we have been earlier this year and potentially where we are heading later this year, dam safety, I guess, overrides those environmental release targets at the time. If there's more water coming into the catchment, then we can get away in any other mechanism. So again, people may recall that earlier this year we did make some additional releases, and I guess we're going to touch on shortly that there's potential for that to be happening again later this year.
Can you just speak up just a little bit?
Yeah,
Yep,
very
no
soft.
worries. I think that might be about it for that one, though, Drew.
Yeah, no worries. I can take over.
Yep, okay. All right.
So the scheme as a whole, you know, we talked about the history of the scheme was about catching water that was going to go over the eastern side of the range, storing it, diverting it and sending it down into the food bowl for long-term certainty of irrigation for food growth. I really love this image because it shows our northern and southern parts of our scheme, so the green being the Tumut, which feeds into the Murrumbidgee, and the blue side shows the Murray catchment, which feeds into the Murray, with the dotted blue line being the centre of the Great Dividing Range. And so you can see there, you know, if you just generalise the areas, we've pretty well doubled that catchment area. And the beautiful part of the history is, on average, and average is a terrible thing to use in weather, but it's pretty well captured that water and doubled what would have naturally gone down those rivers on an average year. So previously they were about 500 gig each, down into the Murray and Murrumbidgee. Our licences are now 1,062 on the southern side and 1,026 on the northern side. So notionally doubled that, which is great news for the food bowl, and a pretty impressive vision for late in the 1800s, early in the 1900s to then come across and develop this. So I mentioned that at the same time that the Snowy scheme was built, as was that irrigation and that food bowl sector. So the Murray and Murrumbidgee infrastructure, their channels, canals, everything that feeds that big food bowl area, that infrastructure was put in around the same time with much of the same equipment, same labour. We're fortunate we've got a pretty good relationship with Murray and Murrumbidgee irrigation, and they obviously provide a fair bit for our nation as a result. Thanks, mate. So the challenge that we face at the moment, and the energy market's been in the news enough this year that everyone should be familiar that there's some challenges ahead as a nation. but is providing that 10-year drought proof or that long-term water certainty by virtue of having storages that can buffer, build up through the wet years, store and then provide that buffer when the droughts come, and provide that certainty of release and the certainty for the irrigation against a 5-minute electricity market where prices are changing every 5 minutes. Impact of renewables is pretty profound, and the retirement of coal is making that energy market really, really unstable at present, or quite flexible, whereas previously, let's go back 10 years ago, it was quite a stable energy industry with a high coal input, where it was what they used to call base load, and for those of us who know, oh yeah, the hot water goes on at night time and it's a lot cheaper. That lot cheaper off-peak is presently in the middle of the day when it's a sunny day. So that whole energy market has changed completely now. And the inputs into that have really changed, so the dynamics of the industry have certainly made it very challenging for any government going forward, let alone us as communities. Thanks, mate. So the scheme overview, and this is just the hydro part of the scheme, so we'll just talk about that going forward. I'll leave gas and any other future investments off the table for the moment. We'll come back to them. But the scheme basically divided, as I mentioned, the Snowy Murray development on the left side of Jindabyne and the Snowy Tumut side of the development on the right side, with the exception of Turmadam, which I'll touch on in a minute. So for the Snowy Murray development, which Jindabyne's part of, we've obviously got Guthinger, the first power station, and up the top of the hill that feeds water into Island Bend. Thank you, James. We can divert water from Island Bend either into GI, which is a short-term, I'll call it a day tank, or a short-term headwater pond for the Murray development. Or if those balances are right, and these are relative levels, if the water's obviously higher in Island Bend, we can actually get it back to Jindabyne as well for long-term storage. We can obviously divert water from Jindabyne through to GI. Keep clicking, please. Yeah, she's on my mum. And as James mentioned, we can pump from Jindabyne to GI, or we can actually turn on the little bypass. So out at the Jindabyne pumping station, there's a small bypass. So when there's a really, really high inflow point, GI's at risk, we can also divert back, or we can put it back here when there's when the market conditions are not right as well, when there's storage available. We can't obviously pump from Jindabyne to Jindabyne as James mentioned. So that water then for the Snowy Murray development goes into GI down through Murray 1 power station, where there's 10 units, into a little intermediate pond which just regulates in between when there's some imbalance of energy, through Murray 2 power station and then out to Cancoven Dam. From there it's obviously into the swampy plains which joins up with the Jindabyne as the Murray, essentially follows down into Lake Hume catchment. Really interesting figures on the building of this, and I'm sorry I mentioned the other outlier was Turmadam, which is actually naturally feeds into the Murray catchment, but was captured and diverted over into the Tumut area and into Tumut ponds, which from there can get back to Jindabyne depending on levels. Just go back, thanks mate. Just some really interesting history, which I find is beautiful about the scheme, is Murray 1 power station with 10 units, smaller capacity, English mechanical part to it. Feeds into Murray 2 power station, which is Toshiba background, post-war, and they got the water balance through them incredibly close. So when all 10 units are on, it puts through the same amount of water as all 4 units at the next station, which is pretty incredible when you think about the history and design of the scheme. Thanks, bud. Dams, I'll throw across to the waterman.
So I guess just wanted to put into context, so this is a snapshot that we grabbed from Water New South Wales's website, getting ready for today. So it hopefully paints a bit of a picture that it's wet everywhere. Just about every dam across the state is getting close to or at capacity at the moment. And I think the next slide that we've got there as well is I guess just a bit of a summary. So we saw plenty of flooding on the news over the last couple of months. So Lismore in particular, Western Sydney and a few other parts of the state. So the New South Wales government have just completed a flood inquiry and a whole bunch of very interesting stats there. But I'll I guess just wanting to probably put into context, I guess, where we're at here and the, you know, we've probably been fortunate that we've missed some of the most extreme of those weather events that triggered some of those. We have dealt with some very high inflows over the last 12 months, and the snow scheme has been able to pretty successfully regulate most of those. And yeah, again, we know that Jindabyne got to a high level and it's still currently quite high, but I guess just to put that into context of what else has happened around the state and further afield as well.
If we can just jump back too quickly, mate, I'll just give a bit of an operation insight to that. I know we're obviously Jindabyne dam focused here, but one of the challenges that you see in predominantly wet years is as storage is back up, I mentioned that they do back up, whilst we've got the ability to pump from Jindabyne, you've also got a really, really big catchment area that's saturated. So whilst we've been doing everything we can to pump fairly well full time for the last 3 months from Jindabyne, when you do get big rainfall events, we've got water coming in everywhere to every dam, and our actual ability to store in these smaller catchment areas is quite limited. So basically inflows need to go somewhere. When the levels do build up, unfortunately here you can see Tumut Ponds is actually higher than Jindabyne. Water can go that way, but at the start of the year Jindabyne was actually higher than Tumut Ponds. So our ability to move water into the smaller areas depends on obviously that balance of water and the level, which is just natural. Thanks, mate. Flip.
So a few more stats. So that's the last 12 months. So this came straight from the bottom. Pretty well, as you can see, pretty much most of the state very much above average, and a few parts of the country new records over the last 12 months. And as I mentioned, if you kind of look at different periods within the last 12 months, you see a whole bunch of different records broken for different time periods. This next one is the outlook from the bottom. As I mentioned, that they have just provided some more info today, so yeah, sorry. So this outlook for spring, again, very wet for most of the country. This is probably pre-La Nina. It's likely to kick in over summer, so we could see those high inflows continuing for quite some time to come, and that's certainly what the outlook is suggesting. Alright, so this one's probably one of the key points that we wanted to cover off today. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time explaining what's on this plot behind me. Pink line starting over on the left and coming across is the actual reservoir levels that we've reported at Jindabyne. So the red line at the top is full supply level, 100%. Black line at the bottom is our operational minimum operating level, it's called. So that's the lowest level that we can get water out either via the pumps or through the outlet works at Jindabyne Dam. That's about 43% though. So when we get down to that level, we can't get more water out. Dam's still a bit over 40% full. So that's our operating range. Pink line is where we've been. The blue dotted line is our, I guess, our operating curve. That's where we would target to be in a normal year. And as we've mentioned a few times, we've been pumping flat out and just haven't been able to get back to that normal operating place to this stage. Based on that information that we're getting from the Bureau and from other weather agencies, the dotted green trace is probably our best guess of what's likely to happen over the coming 12, 18 months. So there's a whole bunch of uncertainty around that. That's on the basis that we are going to get some above average rainfall most months for the next 5-6 months. We could get more, we could get less. Most people that are keen skiers will know there's still plenty of snow up on the hill. That's all factored into this. But yeah, as you can see, we're looking at potentially an extended period up around that full supply level again. If we do get some of the stronger impacts that La Nina can deliver, that could stay up around those levels for longer than is shown there. But again, there's only so much information that we've got that we can use with forecast with great certainty.
Sorry, James, just to clarify, is that October to December at over 100%? I just can't read the months across the bottom.
Thereabouts, yeah. So,
Yeah.
so 2 to 3 months potentially, depending on what's going to happen. And so on the basis of this, we have been working pretty closely with the New South Wales government. So as I say, we've been doing everything we can to send water west, and you know, basically sending that into Hume Dam, which is also full and triggering minor flooding along the Murray River. So they don't really need any more water, but they're getting as much as we can move away. So I've been talking to the New South Wales government around the release patterns that have been set for this year. It's very much our preference to increase those releases and have controlled releases when we can, rather than letting it just get to full supply level and then have a flood roll through whenever the rain comes, and that marrying up with anything else that's happening downstream of the dam as well. They've been very open to that, given I guess where we're at, but there's plenty of work that goes on there, and I'm not going to throw you in the picky, but you know, there's a whole process that they have to go through in terms of consultation to make sure that they're managing all their responsibilities as well in terms of water release from the scheme, because if we release extra water from Jindabyne and then we don't get that forecast happen over the next few months, it's not Snowy Hydro's water, it's someone else's water. So it's someone's a farmer out in the Marine Basin, or it's someone who's representing the environment, that we've made a choice to release that water. So that's probably the tough call, but we're working through that with the government, and I guess to the extent that we do get to that point, will be probably somewhat similar to what people saw earlier this year. Plenty of media releases, statements and information up on the web and social media and all that sort of stuff to give people as much notice as we can in terms of what that might look like. To the extent we are making some controlled planned releases, obviously keeping that within capacities that have minimal impacts, because the alternative could be some quite large flows that could be disruptive, both I guess to the foreshore area and to the downstream communities.
Next one, Wayne.
I think so. Another plot here, and again, probably need to explain this one. All the engineers and scientists love their maths and numbers, but I know that it's not always the easiest thing to understand. So again, levels, so from that minimum operating level up to full supply level, on sort of going from bottom to top, and then going from left to right, the probability of exceedance. So looking back since early 2000, so essentially around that time when Snowy Hydro was corporatised and the operation of Jindabyne changed to be able to deliver those environmental releases down the Snowy River. That's at a daily time step, all the data we've got for that whole period, stacked from the highest level back to the lowest level. So I think a couple of key points out of this plot is that we understand that there are some inconveniences when the lake does get high. It only happens for a very small proportion of time. Maybe if we can just jump back to the last plot again.
Yes, mate.
You can see, I guess, on our operating curves, it's not our intention to operate up in that range as part of normal day-to-day business. But we do have periods where what's coming in is just simply greater than what we can get out. And back to the other one again. You know, when we do get to those levels, we are doing everything that's within our power to bring it back down. And so again, I guess, yeah, probably 5% of the time or less that we've sort of been heading up in that direction. I think the 910, which is too short, but the line, the second line, the line below the dark one, thank you. I guess that's around the level where the Jindabyne community is starting to see you know, the first of some footpaths and things starting
Could
to...
you speak up a bit, sorry?
So, yep, starting to see that some of the infrastructure around the foreshore is starting to approach, well, the water level's starting to approach that infrastructure about those levels. So it's pretty rare that we're in that territory.
And yeah, I think that plot probably shows where we're most comfortable in operating. At the other end of the spectrum is when we're in a drought and we're still required to make all of those releases out west, and we're using the water that we've got in the storages to do so. Anything like through these?
Charlie?
So, little segue for Jeff and council talk to everybody. We just thought, since a lot of the concern and the focus is on the foreshore, we thought we'd just provide some facts around that as well. And because we're not sure how well, a lot of this is in the history, and not sure how well it's understood. But from Pooh Bay to Curiosity Rocks is leased to council on I think it's an 82-year lease. So ending in 2067, and it's at $20 per annum CPI. So, and the idea of that at the time, and still is, that that area of foreshore can be managed for the benefit of the community. And you can sort of see from that previous plot that 99% of the time it is managed and enjoyed with great benefits. There are times when it's inundated, but the majority of the time it is there largely for the benefit of the community. Those footpaths and foreshore is greatly enjoyed. And that's what it's about. My understanding is that the authority at the time did not see itself as a manager of parklands, and had a long conversation with council, and that was how it ended up. We also sort of need to point out that that the council does have the capability to make some money out of that as well. So we haven't sort of said you can't sublease it, etc. So there is certainly an income stream available. There are two, along with the lease, there were some management plans done. Do you want to go to the next slide, please? So there were management plans done, which sort of were plans where we agreed to the things that could and couldn't happen. And really, it's fair to say that most of the things that we've agreed can happen are things that can be activities and uses that should be able to survive some time underwater when it happens. And other than that, we're not particularly, we don't place an awful lot of restrictions. And we do work together an awful lot. We talk to Jeff and we talk to Peter and we talk to Norell and the councillors an awful lot, and try to let them know when these events are coming and when as best we can. I think it is also really important to sort of say that as part of the SAP, we would be very open to the idea of working with council and working with the SAP to try and get some of these lower lying areas up, so that they're not inundated for long periods of time. They're not just basins. That's something, although we always look at something from a dam safety perspective, as long as it passes muster in terms of dam safety, that's not something that we would stand our ground on. So I think that's sort of just a little bit of context around how the interface between us and council on the foreshore works. So, with that, I'm happy to hand over to you.
Thanks, Charlie.
Yep, so with that, we'll just hand over to Jeff. And just before we go to Jeff, just want to reiterate what Charlie just said. We have a strong relationship with council, always have, and do intend to move that forward. So one of the examples that Charlie just talked about was safety aspects. For example, the boat ramp out there opposite the Threadbow Terminal. That was a joint issue between Snowy Hydro, council, and the state government to deliver well over $1 million. It was $1.5 million for a great asset for the community. That's the sort of stuff we get tangled up in as a joint agency. But I'll throw to you, Jeff.
Okay, thanks, Dean. So from council perspective, what our main role out here is really managing, maintaining that social infrastructure. So by that I mean Banjo Patterson Park, the pathways that connect Banjo Patterson through the clay pits and then beyond, the various infrastructure, playgrounds, exercise stations, and the like that are in those locations, and then further around from the clay pits moving out past the caravan park and into the Hatchery Bay trails, mountain bike trails, or shared use trails there, which some are on private property, which we have a memorandum of understanding with the landowner to maintain and deliver those services. So, obviously, council's been impacted, as is the community, with the inundation going over the past year or two now. When the waters receded, what we were faced with was looking at the clean-up side of it, so the maintenance. And I think from when the waters receded, which is probably early this year. Yeah. Anyway, so I think from that point on, in the early stages, it was pretty well known, reported in media and the like, that La Nina was not over. So that was always in the back of our minds that any work that we do, it's going under again. So with the most efficient use of ratepayer money and council resources, we felt that we had to be cautious in how much money we spent on the remediation and the rehabilitation, knowing that it's going under again. I think as a society we then moved in with reporting that La Nina had gone off, watch or alert, to then likely, maybe not coming back, and then what we found again in probably the past month or so, pretty clear that it is coming back, and then from what we've seen from Drew and the team here, that yes, it is coming back and going under. So while that's all been developing over the past probably 6 months, we've been thinking, well, okay, what are the options that we've got to provide a long-term resilience to the social infrastructure that the community uses. And certainly we've had presentation at council meetings suggesting managing certain levels and what have you. I tend to liken that sort of approach in a bushfire context to asset protection zones and building to certain standards and the like. But what we've seen in bushfire, particularly with the disasters that have happened over the past couple of years, that those measures don't always work. So what we're thinking is that the best way to protect the social infrastructure is to relocate it, move it. So, and that's also going to be a more efficient use of money, because we're not going to have infrastructure impacted by these high lake level events. Look, I'm relatively new to the organisation, being at the council for about 2.5 years ago now, and I do ask the questions and discussions internally that, why was it put there in the first place? Why not just move that path another 20 metres up, or build to what have you, that this could have been avoided. But that's in the past. I'm not looking back there, looking on the future. But what we do know is that the special activation precincts, the designs for these areas that we're talking about, they clearly show that the SAP and the state government are going to be upgrading the path just out in front of Banjo Harrison Park there. What they've said is that they're not putting any infrastructure below the high lake level. So that means that through the SAP, the state government are going to be raising the height of that path. That's going to stop the water coming in and inundating that park. Now, the details of exactly what they're intended to do are still to be worked out, whether they intend on just raising that, providing some protection at the foreshore, leaving the depression in, or whether they intend on filling so that you've got a flat park that's above the level. Those details are still to be worked out, but the key point is that the SAP intention will be to construct that path at a level that will stop the inundation. Then we move around to the clay pits. So at the clay pits, again, the intention for the SAP is to reinvigorate, redevelop the clay pits. The clay pits themselves weren't inundated at any stage, with the exception of that low point in the concrete path where we know that water came over there. Most of the impact of the clay pits was really debris and sand sort of washing up, as well as the stormwater issues that we have flowing down from the entrance and into the clay pits. So the SAP is going to resolve a lot of those issues, and importantly for council, the redevelopment of clay pits will mean we won't need to spend as much on maintenance, because every time there's a rainfall event there, you'll know that the stormwater coming in through the entrance, it's washing, causing gully erosion and the like. So that's a positive. Between here and the clay pits, we've got those few locations where the concrete path does go under at that high lake level. So I think the answer there is to move the path just a little bit higher, so then it's not inundated. So then we've got resilient infrastructure that if the lake level comes up, it's still usable. Some of the work that we have been doing, while we have been applying a fairly light touch to the maintenance, we've been doing the basics. So we have cleared off the debris and dirt off the concrete path. You'll notice that the two exercise stations down toward the clay pits, one of those we have now dismantled, removed items, so that we've started cleaning those so that can be reinstated in a suitable location. There's also suggestions that rather than doing that as a concentrated exercise station, but just split it up so that we've got different exercise equipment spread across the length of the pathway. So if you're doing classes, whatever, you can just stop in every so often rather than having it concentrated. The other exercise station, the one with the sandstone wall, that has collapsed, that doesn't need to be moved. All we need to do there is put a better foundation in underneath that sandstone, so that can be done fairly easily and maintain where it is. The playground equipment, we need to look at that as well, because if that's going to be protected from the high lake levels, that just needs to be moved along with the path into another location as well. Same area, but just move it a little bit higher up so that's protected. So that probably takes into account the areas between Banjo Patterson and the clay pits. Beyond the clay pits, I think the most impacted section is the Hatchery Bay shared trail, where there's probably about 2 or 3 sections that go under, including the bridge as well goes completely under. So working with the Jindabyne Trail Stewards, they've identified alternative routes for that shared trail so that it stays above the high lake level as well. So we're just looking at that at the moment, but we believe that there's a strong likelihood that the existing funding that we've got from the state government for the mountain bike trail work around Jindabyne, there's a potential that can actually fund the necessary environmental and cultural heritage studies and the relocation of that. So that will ensure that shared trail is accessible even in the high lake level periods. That's really important because we know that local businesses involved in renting bikes and the like are suffering, and the chamber would most likely know that as well. So that's an initiative, again, making the infrastructure more resilient by moving it above that high lake level. So when we sort of start looking into that, like how can we afford that, who's going to be paying for that? So we've got the SAP looking at the pathway at the front, so making those improvements, that's funded by the state government, budget already approved. The clay pits, likewise, already in the approved SAP budget, and that will happen. The Hatchery Bay mountain bike trails, high likelihood that the existing funding the council has from the state government can cover off on that as well. So then council are really left with identifying solutions for the 2 or 3 locations between here and clay pits where that concrete path goes under to move that path, and likewise moving the exercise stations, the play equipment, and probably some of the picnic tables as well. So in the whole length, an area that we're talking about, it's a relatively small section that we don't have, in my opinion, confirmed funding for at this stage. So that's certainly something that council can look for as well, is funding to do those improvements and make that infrastructure more resilient, which is a relatively small part of the overall improvements that need to happen. So that's probably it from me.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Look, so thanks. I think that's probably the end of the presentation. So we're about to go to the questions, but obviously there's been some key points you can see there. Lanina, obviously you're going to be looking at the Jindabyne filling up during the springtime, which the concerns about that. Drew just touched on doing the best we can to get the water out, but obviously water's coming in faster than we can get it out. And Charlie touched on some of the history on who manages water around the foreshore, and you can see Jeff, it's really good to have someone to come that has some solutions. I love that too. So with that, I know there's some probably other questions. I know some people, maybe some downstream water people live downstream or whatever, but happy to take questions from the floor. I'll just facilitate those. And what we do is for 15, 20 minutes, we're not going anywhere. Just remember, a lot of people don't want to put their hand up. We're not going anywhere, and so you can have a chance to have a chat to us one-on-one at the conclusion of this meeting. So, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. We have Tim overall for Nicole. Jeff, you talked about this unfunded social infrastructure, the paths going between here and clay pits.
Yep.
So what's the sort of estimate unfunded in terms of cost?
But we haven't done a detailed cost estimate of how much that would cost. And yeah, I know I'm being filmed, so probably rather not put a dollar on it. But look, it's not going to be more than $1 million, that's for sure. It'll probably be somewhat less than that. But I don't want to be quoted as having a dollar figure up because we haven't got that estimate just yet.
Is that not what you promised, Tim?
Well, I was introduced as being influential. I think.
Yeah, great. Other questions? Yeah.
There's two questions in one sentence. Firstly, SAP, it's got a horizon of 40 years. So it's really dangerous to say SAP will fix something because we just don't know when it's going to fix it. So if you could sort of like give us a bit more narrow space on
Absolutely.
that.
Yes.
Second part of the question is probably towards hydro. Is that I saw one event or one word on there that said it's a rare event. This will be the third time in 10 years. That stops being a rare event, I think. So moving forward, it'd be interesting to see or to hear from Snowy Hydro how much more often it's going to happen, given that we are in the midst of climate change, given that climate change will probably mean that we're going to have worse droughts and more weather. What are your predictions for the next 10 years?
That's a hard question for climate. It certainly does have a lot of climate scientists, but I'll throw it to Drew on this one.
I think we're all servants of Mother Nature, and we wish we could answer it because we could set up our portfolio to try and manage it better into the future. But the reality is the forecast weather is somewhat variable in its nature, and we're trying to make the best decisions we can with the short period of information we've really got that's clear.
Normally in business you have worst case scenarios.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if we can only need goes for the next 5 years,
Break.
what are your plans for that?
So I think this is the third time in written record that we're going to have 3 in a row. So probably unlikely, but as Drew said, it's you can only deal with the cards you're dealt ultimately.
But as a nation, we plan for things, don't we?
But I think one thing, even in the short term, that's why we're out here now, because I think in the past, we like to, I know you hold your festivals and all sorts of things, we're just trying to give you a snapshot of what's going to happen. So, there's a lot of things happen here in the summertime. And we want to try and manage it because, and also as Drew and James said too, we don't want to see uncontrolled spills because the people downstream, that's a bad story. So we're trying to manage, get the water out, within working with the state government to manage that. I know that is concerned because obviously down around Dalgety there's a fair flow down through there.
We love the water.
I know you love the water, but of course you don't want to see a big flush there, which is what we don't. That's what we don't.
So, and maybe to put that into context a little as well. So everyone I know had some pretty heavy rain early August, washed a bit of the snow away, and the inflows into Jindabyne Dam over 2 days there were 3 or 4 times the size of the largest flushing flows that have been delivered in the last 10 years. So it's important that we've got some ability to manage those sort of inflows.
And the flip side of this, do remember, we're out here talking about a wet season. We also do when it's a drought, we need to come out and manage that community expectations as well. So I mean, we're talking about the it works all the way. That's why we try and give you a good heads up within reason. I think what you were saying, Drew.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely reasonable question. And one of the challenges is we might be sitting here in 3-4 years and be going, gee, there's a whole lot of dirt out there as well, which we just don't know.
That's the importance of that next plot.
Yeah.
Because it's not the future is the future. We can't predict the future. We know climate change is coming. But if you go to that next plot, that ought to help you understand how often it's going to be really wet and how often it's going to be out at Lion Island. That's the best answer we can give you. That's the importance of that plot.
In the shorter term, part of the challenge is we are at that critical mass point where we're trying to get rid of as much as we can, but the reality is it just keeps coming. If that continues, well, our hands are absolutely tied completely. We've got nothing else to do.
But you can see a prediction there out to probably 12 months in that previous graph. So it's not out 5 years, but that's out to January 24. Yeah.
So how responsive is state government in adjusting the levels that need to be released?
Can I jump in also to give the second part of the answer to the question? Because the second part of the answer, in my opinion, the most important part of the answer is what we're doing about the resilient infrastructure. If we can raise, put that pathway,
put it in the right spot in the first place. Yeah,
put the paths in the right spot, fix the entry bay trails. All of a sudden,
the problem's gone.
It's never going to be inundated. So we're not really asking, well, why are you managing it to 90% or not managing it to 90% or whatever? Because the infrastructure's safe. And then it's just then it gets back to what Charlie said, which is how long's the beach. But I think that's the most important thing. And
Yeah, fair call. Where's the money going to come from?
So to answer Olivier's question, so okay, so when we're talking about the SAP, so rightly pointing out a 40-year horizon. So council's involved in monthly updates with monthly meetings with the SAP. It was Rebecca Fox, but she's moved in a higher role now. And I can't speak on behalf of the SAP, but what I can speak to is the discussions that we've had and council's views that do get put to the SAP. Probably going back earlier in the year, we said to the SAP, as you're transitioning into implementing the SAP, and I believe that at the moment the SAP team is transitioning the SAP across to the Regional Growth Development Corporation for implementation. So we said to the SAP team, well, you've got a great opportunity here. You know, the clay pits, council spends quite a bit of money on maintenance. Every time there's a rain event, as I said, there's a problem. We spend maintenance. If the SAP can focus on that area first, they can get a quick win. The community can see, well, actually, it is delivering something in an area that the community definitely want to see. There'll obviously need to be detailed consultation as to what it does actually look like when it's built. And from council's perspective, if they can get in and do something quick there, then that's less of a maintenance issue for us. So they committed to undertaking that. The money for the vacancies in the budget. Their advice back when we were discussing this earlier in the year is that they would look to potentially get that underway with procuring design consultants and the like toward the end of this year. Now, I'm not sure exactly what month that is, but definitely starting this year was their commitment. So I think they've shown a real willingness to work with council and to listen to our advice, which is based on the strong local knowledge, to know that these are the few of the areas that if you actually do deliver something there can be a lot of goodwill achieved and the community can think, wow, something has actually started. And I'd say exactly the same thing with the park out here. If we can get the focus on that path going in and being raised to protect the park into the future, and clay pits, that sorts that out. So in terms of the question about funding, so that's SAP funding, that's state government funding. The Hatchery Bay, the mountain bike trails, again, the funding, state government funding, already with council with the project. We just need to look in a bit more detail to make sure that we can actually afford those upgrades as well, because they weren't in the project initially. So the only area that we're looking at right now that I believe is not funded is the relocating the footpaths that go under, which is not all of them, but I mean obviously at the front of ridges there, you can see the damage that's been caused. Moving those up, moving the exercise station up, playground, a few picnic tables and the like. So that's the bit that's unfunded, but I don't think that's the major amount of money that's needed for that. So that's really the bit that we're looking for.
Is that something that Snowy Hydro could do?
Look, take that on notice. A good question. Look, I've got a question here in the front, then I'm going to go to the back and I'll come back, okay? So your question first. I'll come back to you next, yep.
My arms are just a lot longer than my friend Vicky.
It's just mainly that I'd like to discuss the elephant in the room in relation to all of this. The reason why Snowy Hydro has to keep water in the dam is because the legislation does not allow them to put any extra water other than environmental water down over the dam wall. If that legislation can be changed, you're not going to be presented with the same problem you are year after year after year. It's not going to be an easy solution because that legislation was written by Victoria, New South Wales and the federal government. To get that change would make a fundamental difference to the river, because unfortunately when they let the water go last year over the dam wall, we should be getting 21% of the Snowy, but they had to take that water off this year's allocation. So we understand, I think it's just insane that Jindabyne has to get flooded simply because the legislation that was written 20 years ago, and Charlie made direct reference to this, we can't know what's going to be in the future. But that legislation was written 20 years ago. They couldn't know what was going to happen today.
So I think that's a really, really good point, but we can't solve that. That's something to take. That's a state government. They own the water.
I know that, but the thing is that Snowy could actually actively challenge the fact that that legislation needs to be changed.
I think you do a pretty good job of
I know, but I'm not prepared to stand on my own.
So
I need Snowy and the government and also Snowy Council to recognise you can't change what is the legislation, but it needs to get changed, and we wouldn't have that problem out there. It's wrong.
Righto. Question off the back.
So, my main question is where this blind side came in, where they put the, you know, who decided to put the paths down below the 100%, or if they're not, how is it above the 100%? What's up?
Hang on, so the question is, no, hang on, no.
Yeah, that's right.
So just be clear on your question again, sorry?
Yeah, no, that's right. So my question is who initially made the decision to put the paths down so low? I mean, luckily it's...
Oh, the paths, okay.
Yeah, well, you know, so we hear the word inundating Jindabyne. It's a couple of paths and a foreshore. It's quite a small issue when you look at the greater thing of managing the water flows and making sure the environmental stuff is all balanced and sorted. It's quite an easy fix,
Yeah,
right?
no,
Just lifting a few
and I think it's been quite clear here, like Snowy doesn't own the infrastructure around the foreshore. And I hate to do a little bit of a flip pass, which a local.
No, that's all right. That's all right. That's the question, right? It's a council decision at some point to put the path.
And I think Jeff did come up with a solution. I mean, history is history. It was there before Jeff came along. It was a decision by local government to put the paths where they were. I think. Are you pretty right, Jeff?
Yeah. No, it was the surveys.
Just hang on a second.
I was going to say, yeah, as I said earlier, you know, internally I'll have a chat with a few people. I do ask the question, you know, why was it there below the level? I don't know. But as I said, that's sort of backward looking. I'm more actually looking forward to think how we can fix it. So I don't know the answer to the question. I don't really think it's overly relevant. I think the solution, state government funding locked in for the SAP for this part, the clay pits, we've got project funding that will in all likelihood be able to solve the problems that Hatchery Bay with the mountain bike trails. We're just looking at funding options for those bits in between here and the clay pits, which is not the biggest amount, so I'm more interested in looking forward. But it's a good question, one that I think about.
If I can, Dean, it's a little bit broader than here, but like even in the recent flood inquiries, it sort of said where we know that there's likely to be water inundation, have it for community use, where it can allow for that and have that buffer, not build infrastructure there.
Yeah, that's the biggest rub. I mean, this is water under the bridge. If like our biggest issue right now is that we've got some paths that are overflowing.
It's the flow, it's like, without the pun intended, but it is the flow-on effect that because of an inherited culture of the town and how active the foreshore is to the community, you've got large-scale events like the Lake Light sculpture, for example, that had to be cancelled this year because of the available space that they use wasn't available. That's a massive multi-facet industry issue. You've got tourists that aren't coming down and paying for their accommodation. You've got restaurants empty, all because of this one large-scale event that happens at Easter couldn't happen. So it is an inherited cultural issue that, whilst I appreciate what you're saying, that it is just a footpath, there are many other multifaceted issues.
No, I totally agree. But if that's our big rub and not the ecological impacts of having such a big dam in a watershed, then we're not stressed about anything. Like if we're not going to talk about the impacts of aquatic life, you know, if that's our biggest issue is just the effects from the foreshore and not what this dam's been doing to a watershed for however many years, then I just don't see a reason to be stressed.
We might just go to the next question.
You might, look, am I missing the point? But didn't Snowy Hydro lift the dam level some years back?
So the question is changing the dam level a number of years back.
When you say change the dam level, you mean
To which the water could rise.
so the
100%
operating level, so full supply level is the same as it's been since 1967 when the dam was built. Minimum operating level has not changed. So that range from 0 to 100 in which we operate has been the same from day one. The change that did occur when Snowy Hydro was corporatised in 2002 and the introduction of the environmental flows to the Snow River were that to be able to deliver a flushing flow through the spillway gates, you need enough water up against the spillway gates to actually get those large flows through. So historical operation prior to that, dam did operate a lot lower a lot of the time. It's just not possible to deliver the environmental releases if we don't hold the lake at a higher level than it historically had been.
So that makes sense.
So the physical wall didn't change, but you operate at a higher level.
You operate at a higher level, but you're also letting a lot more water out into the Snow River through the years.
So that is, that had a flow-on environmental effect another way. In meeting your legislative requirements to generate these flows, you created an impact on the foreshore for the community here. In that environmental impact statement must have been done, wasn't there some responsibility on Snowy Hydro, admittedly imposed on you, I'm not saying, you know, you chose to do it, to deal with these less than $1 million worth of mitigation that you could have put in place to mitigate the effects on the township? If SAP's doing all this stuff, others bike paths are being funded, then surely there's some contribution Snowy Hydro could make to offset the impact upstream, if you like, that you had to do your job downstream. So it's not a blame game.
That's a pretty detailed question.
But I think, so just to be clear though, those environmental releases, they're not something that Snowy Hydro chose
I'm not
to
saying you, but
that program
in the course
is
of meeting your legislative operating requirements, you impacted, in effect, what happens in the township of Jindabyne.
Yeah, that higher normal operating level though isn't up there. It's around about here though, so there's still a huge buffer there, just slightly higher than what we normally operated at. Is that right, James?
Deliver those releases.
And it's the New South Wales government's flow program. It's not Snow Hydro's flow program. We just delivering the volume that we're asked to deliver each day.
So are you saying you have to keep the lake higher to do that? Does the lake still fluctuate?
It does, but so it adds another operating parameter that we have to
You have to operate higher in order to meet
deliver the flushing
requirements
flows
to get the flows down the river.
And each year we go through a process with New South Wales government. We tell them, here's the risk that would entail, and it's the New South Wales government that will decide whether or not those flows go ahead.
So yeah, so a bit of a yes and a no there, but yeah. So there's a question there behind.
So I guess I'm interested to understand more about about what Snowy's view would be on legislative change, because I think that's not impossible. And what I see here is that if one of the outcomes of the SAC is to actually spend money moving a whole lot of stuff away from the lake, when we probably know that what climate change is going to mean is extremes, and while we'll have periods of the lake being very high, we're also going to have extended periods probably of it being low. And at that point, a whole lot of infrastructure and further away from the lake and less connection is not necessarily going to be a wonderful outcome. If an outcome of the SAP is moving stuff further away from the lake, that doesn't overly excite me. So the alternative of solving the 100% issue with legislative change that would allow you to operate, to not have to have it that low and be able to let water down, are there environmental issues related to that? And is it something that Snowy Hydro would be open to, or is there commercial reasons why it's not such a good option?
It probably would be, a solution here, but just remember that it's not our job to change legislation. We're actually owned by the federal government. As James and Drew and Charlie said, we operate under the water legislation, which is a state legislation. So really, it's up to the community if you want to do that, and it's obviously it's a free society. Really, you can lobby and see how that happens. Well, we have to work within the parameters that are legislated currently. So our hands are tied. I would say, Drew, what would you say to that?
I think that's a beautiful thing about freedom of speech. Yeah, that water at the moment is predominantly there for irrigation for the food bowl, and if we want to change that volume or that thing, then that's part of the conversation and the beautiful thing about our society.
The other thing about moving things away from the lake is the impact isn't just on the paths and those bike tracks, it's the whole foreshore. It also means visitors can't access the lake, they can't use beaches, there's trees that are being, when the lake's that high, they're all dying and creating
I think my answer to that would be, what I heard Jeff say was, it's not necessarily about moving it away from the water line, if you like, to some of the level could be raised.
I'll just unpack that a little bit. So
when you think about, so Banjo Patterson Park, that pathway at the front there, it is about raising it to it's probably about 1.5 meters. If you look at the tree in the middle that looks like it's dying or dead, but we're hoping that it's not. If you look at the mark there, it's about 1.5 meters. So that's is up. But as you move around between here and the clay pits, who've walked those paths, you know that the high water mark was, you can see it still now, it's only between 10 to 20 metres. So it's in the same reserve as you go around, only another 10, 20 metres away. So you're just sort of moving this way. So it's not for the high water mark. I think where it's noticeable is when it is really low, so there's no sort of moving away there. And then we move around to Hatchery Bay. There's, as I said, the trustees have already identified some options to relocate the path in about 3 locations, so that shared trail is still going. So I think if the path was moved there, when you're riding your bike or walking or running, you're not really going to notice that it's shifted. So I don't see that it's going to be.
I think that was pretty much the same point I was going to make. That the same way you've got to get used to water levels being here, the tourists and people that are coming to enjoy it are also going to have to, and the SAP, and we've spent a lot of time trying to explain this to them, are going to have to get used to the lake being way out of the island, the level being. So this is just that's the power of that plot. It spends a lot of time down there and a very little bit of time up there. And so is that worth changing the legislation for? It depends a little bit on what you're talking about in terms of legislation change. But
So I think we've got a question. We'll take a couple more, but one at the back and there. We'll go to 3 questions in a row, and then we'll wrap it up. We're not going anywhere, so take those 3 questions and we'll wind it up.
Thank you. A couple of really interesting points that when you start bordering and talking about legislation, I don't think we should be scared about changing legislation. That's what politics is all about. And if it means there's an election in March, if it means that there's going to be a change of government which is more attuned to listening to what people actually think, which is what I think is coming out here, then so be it. Second point is that without wishing to beat up council, I mean, it's not a sport that I get involved in at all. But to see the SAP as a holy grail, which will suddenly solve all our problems, I think if you think that's an answer to what we're dealing with now, then I think you've completely lost it. Because SAP is not the answer to what we've created here. And the other point I want to make is that Snowy Hydro have never had this much water before, except for in 2012 when it was quickly moved away. The Gates Road burn, very dramatic, but it isn't in people's memory what it was like to have the water, inundating our foreshores for such a long period of time with no response from Snowy Hydro, no response from council, according to the public and the tourists who live and who come here. And now I think we're looking at the future. It seems to me that we've got to accept that this high water mark has got to change. And if you keep saying that the high water mark that's fixed, it's not fixed. It's a construct. And so are the dams. We built the dams. They weren't here. The lake wasn't here. It's all a construct. So we have control over this from the very beginning. And by lowering our high water mark, the problem seems to be fairly easily solved. At that trigger point, water can be managed, and you accept that instead of having it at 9/11, it operates at a different level. Because we're now about to see the water coming out. It's coming up now. And all the work the council can talk about, with respect, when? I mean, it's not going to happen now because the water's coming up again. And, in a few months' time, all that we see now that's brown will be red water again. I think the inevitability has to be dealt with, that we can do something about it without spending the money that is going to other things, or denying that we can't change the things.
We've got a comment from there. Just before that, I just like to refute that Snowy has been silent on this, because that's totally not. I won't accept that. But I'll just throw to you, please.
So I just want to re-emphasise some facts that have been put here tonight. All of New South Wales is wet, and This is a working dam that provides the Murray River to the food bowl. The Murray catchment is wet, absolutely saturated. So the amount of water that they would normally take, they don't require at this stage, but there's still water going across the hill into the Murray River. The Snowy River is doing really well. It's having massive flows down it, which is just wonderful for actually clearing it. Not so good for the wildlife. However, we are in a unique situation in these last 3 years, so coming up with another La Nina year. What we have done is work together, that being Snowy, Council, the Chamber and State Government with the SAP program. And the SAP, yes, it is not the Holy Grail. However, it provides us with an opportunity. And we'd be crazy not to take the opportunity to actually start getting some quick fixes and funding in key areas that we would like to see improved. And it's really important that we actually focus on what the issue is today. Now, if the community wants to lobby for legislation to reduce the high water mark, you can do that, well, it'll take a long time. Whereas, as Jeff said, we're here solutions focused. And we really want to focus on what we can do today, what are the opportunities today, and actually working with you as a community, Snowy Hydro, Council, State Government. It's really important. And taking into account Vicky's point around the fact that the Snowy River is regulated. The water that goes across the mountain is regulated. And we are working in a regulated environment that we have to make the best of, and we are coming into another La Nina year, and we're not looking forward to it because we want to get out and fix our roads. We want to fix the damage from all of this wet weather, but we're going to be restrained again. So let's work together, not actually look at what we can't do, let's look at what we can do and take the opportunities that are in the front of us.
I love a positive comment, it's fantastic. So I'll go to ladies first and yourself.
Just from the community's perspective, understandably we've heard from a lot of people here with a lot of different aspects of the issues surrounding the lake, its levels and the impacts. Obviously the infrastructure impact of the foreshore, like there's no point dwelling on the past of what was built, has been built, and I guess the community frustration that I'm hearing personally is around what now. You know, there's been a few discussions about great ideas that might help us in 5-10 years, but I'm seeing the effects of safety concerns from the community when the rubble from the lake, from the water moving up and down, and kids on bikes, and all of a sudden there's a split footpath. Like real community concern, the smell of Banjo Patterson Park when it turns into an inlet, and the health concerns around that from the community. These are all real issues that we've just dealt with and we're about to deal with again, that I'm listening, but I'm not hearing anything that's going to help us tomorrow. And given that we're at the beginning of spring and that lake is sitting at 85%, I think it's a bit of a hold your hat moment to what we experienced last summer and what we're experiencing this summer coming, and the flow-on effect, as I mentioned, about it's everyone in this town that is being impacted by something like the level. I would hate to see the Lake Light Sculpture event have to be cancelled again. That's going to lose traction of sponsors and supporters and visitors that many of our businesses rely on. So I just wonder what can be done in a short term on behalf of the community that love this asset and rely on it for a multitude of reasons. Something, like I've often thought, like can something like dredging happen where you just dig from the bottom of the lake? Surely that's something that, that isn't requiring legislation or footpaths to be moved. I'm looking for something short term.
Short answer, that's, dredging isn't going to happen, but I think one reason why we came in, we fully understood last year when things like the Lake Light Festival couldn't go through, we get it. But that was a big issue, so that's why we're here early, giving you probably now, it's bad, it's not the story you probably wanted to hear, but we've been very, very open here about the likelihood of it happening. So at least you can try and work out a way with council, Snowy, maybe we can work with the community to work out, I don't know what the answer is. At least we've been very, very open, everyone's been here really open about potentially what's going to happen.
And the one thing, that I hope that you heard from James, the one thing that we can do is pump like crazy. And James, can you explain how much pumping we've been doing?
No, I appreciate the hard work. Like, I've lived here for 30 years. I understand how the Snowy system works. I learned it through primary school and high school. I truly get it.
And you would have seen the dust flying off the lake too.
Yeah.
Right.
I truly appreciate the hard work that a very large team goes to. But as far as the community, I'm looking for.
I'll just take your point. Your point is really, is there a better way to even just try to mitigate in the short term? I think it's a really good point. We're talking to Mayor Davis. We do meet. I think if there's some way we can help, I think we've been very open. If we can help, we will. Because we try to enhance the community where we operate in all sorts of ways. And look, we'll just take that point. I haven't got an answer for you right now.
Yeah.
But if you can take it, we will look at it and see if we can help mitigate it. It may not reach that point, as James said, but we've been quite open. With likelihood it will. It may drop off by Easter time, hopefully. But
Snowy put some money towards moving the pies instead of taking money from the state.
Look, I said there was a questions about Snowy contribution. Look, I can't answer that at the moment. I'm not.
Just in the interest of forming a better relationship.
I think we just take that. We have helped in many ways over the years, and even lately we, helping council with some key land around the lake for major assets with treatment plants.
It's always terrible saying probably not, but what you got to do, what you got to say is we have provided, we're right at the finishing point now, providing Copperton Point for a new water treatment plant. We're helping provide land for waste transfer station at a relatively low cost. A lot of this activation will occur on Snowy land. It's terrible to say, I don't think so, but without saying, look, we actually do an awful lot. So please don't forget that we do an awful lot.
Nobody realised what Catherine said, but it's not falling on deaf ears, put it that way. So look, we'll go to your question. This will be the final question. Not going anywhere.
So just to add to Dean's statement. Sorry.
What we're also looking at, in the short term, whilst SAP raising for that path, we are exploring options to raise that path potentially. We're looking at it. It's not something I can say, yes, we're going to do this in December, but we're looking at it because that may well be the shorter term.
Sometimes from a corporate point of view, throwing some money out towards the community can really shine some good light on the company and change the
We hope we do that. We hope we can be seen.
We give either way already.
So can I just add to Dean's point? We had a discussion about the fact that there is a forecast that we're going to have another La Nina year. So in our discussion it was, we'll go to the Jindabyne community and have a discussion about this is what the forecast is, this is what we're currently doing, and in that preparedness around another La Nina year and the fact that Easter time was really just not the best decision around cancelling the Lake Light program, can we actually plan out from today of all of the events that people like to actually attend in Jindabyne, and if we can't do it in the form that it normally is done, can we do it differently? So if we start planning early and have that discussion early, then we can continue on as the community, Jindabyne community actually expects. But one of the things is that we're having the discussion early. Seeing the forecast, may not actually realise to the point that the forecast is saying, but at least we're trying to be.
Still got a question there?
Yes. Question/comments with the moving of the path. It's a great idea to have a path that can continuously stay above the high water line. I don't see any point in destroying the lower path because, as Penny says, like it's really nice to have the path closer to the lake. And I'd even go one step further. Let's put another path like there in Noah. because no doubt 5 years' time it'll be a drought again. So what's wrong with having a bunch of paths? I don't see the point in ripping up infrastructure that's there. I do see the point in raising it so it goes a little bit higher. Yeah, as long as it's safe, and there is design things that we could work on with that. And then I suppose question/comment again is I've been speaking to a lot of community members about pitching in and helping out wherever we can. I know bureaucracy is a really slow rolling ball, and what I would like to see is Council and Snowy Hydro getting behind any community-driven projects to try and flood-proof or clean up or improve the area.
You came up with a good idea, you come to see me. That's it.
Yeah, all right, sweet. So, what we need to do is just get the bureaucratical stuff out of the way so that people can get in
And the Friends of Jindabyne still operate? Remember they used to do the foreshore cleanups, used to work under council's banner, does that still operate?
haven't heard of
Cleanups.
it.
And I'd like to say, Jason knows that these conversations like this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I would back up Jeff in saying that he's very working in with the ideas that I've had. But I suppose what we need is just to just get the red tape out of the way, so people who are keen to do it, and just we can get in and do it, and get it done, as Lou said, tomorrow.
But I think a community wanting to help themselves is a great concept to start with. So great issue. We're going to come back with some ideas. We can bring out to council, Snowy, absolute minutes. Look, I think that will just wrap it up. I think we've been pretty open tonight, and I think, look, the presenters have been really, really open. To be honest, I think they deserve a round of applause. Thank you everybody for coming out. I know, it's late night and all that sort of stuff, but please, if you want to talk to anybody one-on-one, we'll hang around for a few minutes, and thank you everybody for coming tonight. And also too, if you saw the benefit of it tonight, actually doing this, even every springtime or even more often, please encourage your chamber to host this sort of thing again. We're more than welcome. We'll come out here and do it again if you would have us. So thank you.
Just one last thing. This doesn't happen freely. The bowling club sponsors the chamber very well. I encourage you to go upstairs and have a drink, or have a meal. The ribs are absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.